My name is Robert Johnson, and I'm 62 years old. A retired architect who spent most of his life tracing lines, designing blueprints, and believing that if the foundation was solid, nothing could ever bring it down. But life, as I learned, doesn't follow structural logic. I've built homes that still stand tall across 3 states, yet I couldn't keep the one I shared with my wife from collapsing when illness swept through it. After she passed, the silence in the evenings grew so heavy it felt like dust settling over unfinished plans. I raised 2 children alone. Ezra, my eldest, built a successful life for himself out in Seattle. Jade, my younger one, stayed nearby, working in marketing, carrying herself with the same calm grace her mother had. When she laughed, it filled the house with the same light my wife used to bring. For years, that laughter was enough for me. As long as Jade was happy, I could live with the quiet. Then she told me she'd met someone, Ethan Moore. I smiled when she said his name and tried to make it reach my eyes. The first time Ethan walked into my home, I noticed how the last light of the day fell across his face. His smile was broad, almost rehearsed, the kind of smile people practice in mirrors before interviews. Everything about him looked polished. His suit, his neatly combed hair, even the way he shook my hand. It lasted just a beat longer than it should have. Jade glowed beside him, nervous but proud, and I wanted to believe that maybe he was the one who could bring warmth back into our family. We sat down for dinner that night. The familiar scent of roast chicken and rosemary, my wife's old recipe, filled the air. Between the soft clink of cutlery and the low hum of conversation, Ethan spoke with the ease of someone who knew how to charm a room. He complimented everything, the food, the furniture, even the lighting. For a while, I almost relaxed. Then he asked how long it had been since my wife passed. 8 years, I told him. He nodded thoughtfully, then leaned back and asked whether her life insurance had helped us manage financially. It was the sort of question that didn't belong at a dinner table. Jade froze for a heartbeat, then laughed it off, trying to smooth the moment over. I gave a polite, vague answer, something about being comfortable, but Ethan kept going, talking about the importance of investments, of making money work for you. His words were smooth, his tone practiced. I'd met enough clients over the years to recognize when someone was probing for weakness. Later that night, after they left, I lingered in the dining room, rinsing plates that were already spotless. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Ethan's eyes had drifted across the room while he talked, measuring everything, as if he were studying the layout of the house itself. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. I told myself I was imagining things, but instincts have a way of whispering, even when logic insists on silence. I sat down with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the family photos on the mantel. My wife's smile in the frame seemed to speak to me, reminding me of something she used to say, "Some walls protect, but others imprison." I realized then that if I ignored my gut, my silence might become one of those walls. When Ethan and Jade were leaving earlier, I'd shaken his hand at the door. His grip had been steady, deliberate, too measured, like a performance instead of a connection. As they walked down the path, the porch light caught his face. The smile stayed flawless, but it never touched his eyes. That, more than anything he'd said, unsettled me. Soon, Ethan was everywhere. Sunday dinners, backyard barbecues, even helping Jade hang the new curtains she'd bought for my living room. He slipped into our routine so seamlessly it felt like he'd always been there. At first I told myself it was good. My daughter deserved someone dependable. But the longer I watched, the more cracks I noticed beneath that polished exterior. He always found a way to bring up money, steering every conversation toward real estate, stocks, or family finances. When I asked about his job, his answers sounded memorized, like a salesman's pitch rather than a man's life. That night, after they'd gone home, I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop cutting through the dark. I typed his name into every search engine I could find. Nothing substantial appeared in my search. No business filings, no professional profiles, just scattered fragments that didn't line up with the story he'd told Jade. The more I scrolled, the tighter the knot in my stomach grew. I'd handled countless contracts throughout my career. but I'd never seen anyone so carefully hidden behind a spotless facade. I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Dean Carter, a former police officer who'd turned to private investigation after retiring. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small diner off the highway. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon. I slid a printed photo of Ethan across the table as Dean settled into the booth. He studied it for a long moment before asking what had me uneasy. I told him everything, the polished charm, the empty records, the way he'd sized up my home as though he were appraising it. Dean leaned back, nodding slowly. "Men like him don't chase love," he said quietly. "They study their marks. They figure out what you want to hear, mirror it until you trust them, and then they take what they came for." I asked him what he thought I should do. Dean looked out the window, the morning light catching the lines in his face. "Keeping quiet might keep things calm for now," he said finally, "but silence is the soil where lies grow fastest." His words followed me all the way home. The mountains stood sharp against a winter sky, and the air bit colder than usual. I kept thinking about Jade's laughter, how lately it sounded lighter, thinner, as though she were forcing brightness into every word. What if I was wrong? What if my doubt destroyed her happiness for nothing? But what if I was right, and my silence cost her everything? That night, sleep wouldn't come. I wandered the hallway until I stopped outside her old bedroom, still painted the same soft blue it had been since she was a child. I made myself a promise right there in the dark. I'd find out who Ethan Moore truly was, no matter how long it took, even if Jade never forgave me for it. Sometimes protecting someone you love means accepting the role of the villain, at least for a while. I turned off the light, knowing that whatever peace had remained in my life was gone. My search had just begun. I discovered the truth about the money on a Sunday morning. Jade came over for coffee, glowing with excitement, her voice bubbling as she talked about wedding colors and the menu. Then, somewhere between her stories, she mentioned casually that Ethan had helped her invest her inheritance into a private real estate project in Colorado Springs. She said it proudly like she'd done something smart. I remember the sound of my spoon striking the mug, a sharp metallic chime that echoed too long. "How much did you invest?" I asked. She smiled. "All of it." My heart turned cold. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, my hand tracing the edge of the window frame, trying to think, trying to breathe. Fear and anger kept trading places inside me, neither willing to settle. I called Dean and told him everything. He said he'd dig deeper. While I waited, I decided to test Ethan myself. The next evening, when he and Jade came by, I mentioned offhand that I was considering selling my old mountain cabin, the one my wife and I had built before the kids were born. I said the market was strong, that it might fetch around $700,000. Ethan's expression flickered, just for a heartbeat, but I caught it. His tone shifted too. Suddenly, he was talking about capital gains, property taxes, reinvestment options, his voice smooth, but his eyes gleaming like a man already counting someone else's money. That was all the proof I needed. After they left, I sat alone in the dark, the ticking of the wall clock sounding louder than usual. The house felt still, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting. The next day, Dean called. His tone was tight. He'd traced several accounts under Ethan's name, and 2 others under fake identities, all linked to offshore banks. No business licenses, no legitimate records. Just a paper trail that screamed fraud. "You're dealing with a professional," he said. "Someone who knows how to vanish the second things turn dangerous." My hand trembled as I ended the call. That night, I called Detective Olivia Reyes. She listened closely while I explained everything Dean and I had uncovered. Her tone stayed calm but serious. She advised me to collect proof quietly, keep my composure, and not confront Ethan yet. We both understood the wedding could become the perfect moment. If things went wrong, it would all unfold publicly. A plan began forming in my mind. I despised what it required of me, but there didn't seem to be another way. By midnight, the house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the groan of the old floorboards beneath my steps. I found myself standing in Jade's room. Her wedding dress hung beside the window, its lace glowing faintly under the slice of moonlight that crept through the curtains. I whispered into the stillness, telling her I hoped she'd forgive me one day, even if she never understood why I had to do this. Then I turned off the light and let the darkness settle, knowing the storm had already begun to move. The morning of the wedding dawned brighter than I had imagined. The sky over Aspen Falls stretched in a flawless blue, crisp and gleaming like glass. The white stone church perched on the hill above the valley, glowing in the sunlight like something from a painting. Guests arrived in soft colors, murmuring with excitement, carrying small bouquets, their voices blending into a gentle hum. I stood near the church steps, shaking hands and offering practiced smiles. Though my pulse refused to slow, I wanted to believe I was wrong, that the recording Dean had retrieved from Ethan's phone was meaningless. But the sound of Ethan's voice from that file replayed in my head, steady and cold, speaking about Jade's inheritance as if it were spare change. Inside, the church smelled of lilies and polished wood. Perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the faint creak of pews and the whisper of silk dresses. I took my place near the front pew and glanced up at the clock. 10:45 a.m. The hands crawled forward like they were fighting time itself. My heartbeat seemed to slow, then race again each time the doors opened. Ezra sat beside me, shoulders stiff, eyes restless. He leaned in once and murmured, "It's going to be okay." I nodded, pretending to believe him. Then the music began. Everyone rose as Jade appeared in the doorway, her godfather escorting her down the aisle. Soft light spilled through the stained glass, wrapping her in a pale halo. She looked breathtaking, alive, radiant, and full of hope. For an instant, guilt carved through me. What if I'd misjudged everything? What if this was all a terrible mistake? But then my eyes met Ethan's. He stood at the altar, posture perfect, expression smooth, that same flawless smile that never reached his eyes. The ceremony began. The pastor's voice filled the room, steady, warm, and sure. When Ethan spoke his vows, his delivery was effortless, too polished, each word slipping out like a practiced line. I knew performance when I saw it. Jade's voice, on the other hand, trembled with emotion, pure, trusting, unaware. In my jacket pocket, the small speaker pressed against my hand, heavy as a brick. Then came the moment. The pastor recited the familiar words. "If anyone has reason, these two should not be joined." The world seemed to shrink around me. My chest tightened. My fingers moved before I even realized it. I stood and pressed play. A faint hiss of feedback echoed first. Then Ethan's voice filled the church. Calm, calculated, cruel. He was laughing as he talked about the wedding like a transaction, about Jade's inheritance as his next paycheck, and about me as the gullible old man too blind to see it coming. Gasps swept through the pews like wind through trees. Jade froze at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Ethan spun toward me, his face pale but his eyes razor-sharp. He tried to speak over the noise, insisting it was a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context, a setup. But then his recorded laughter continued to play. Mocking, unmistakable, his mask cracked. Anger twisted his features. He stepped forward as the guests instinctively moved back. From the last pew, Detective Reyes rose quietly. Two uniformed officers followed her, stepping into the aisle. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Ethan bolted, his shoes hammered against the floor as he sprinted down the aisle. Sunlight flashed through the glass doors as they burst open, and the officers gave chase. Shouts erupted outside, echoing off the valley walls. Guests turned in stunned silence, whispers and gasps filling the space. I didn't move. I just stood there, the echoes of his voice still hanging in the air. Jade's bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering like fallen confetti across the church floor. Ezra rushed to her side, wrapping his arm protectively around her shoulders, murmuring words I couldn't make out. The pastor's trembling voice urged everyone to remain calm. Then, the heavy wooden doors opened once more. Detective Reyes stepped back into the sanctuary, her uniform pressed, her face unreadable. She spoke softly but firmly, announcing that Ethan Moore was now in custody. I managed a single nod. My throat refused to work, as if every word I wanted to say had turned to stone. Jade turned toward me, confusion and heartbreak clouding her eyes. Her voice cracked as she asked if I had known all along. I told her yes. Then came the question that hurt more than any accusation. Why hadn't I warned her sooner? I told her I needed proof, that sometimes love makes people deaf until the truth becomes too painful to ignore. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, darkening the white of her wedding dress. Ezra held her closer, his own expression crumbling with hers. I turned away not out of indifference, but because I couldn't bear for them to see what my face betrayed. The guests whispered behind us. The choir stood frozen mid-note. Outside, faint metallic clicks broke the stillness, the sound of handcuffs locking shut. A sound final and sharp, like a door closing on a nightmare. In that moment, I knew I had saved my daughter from a lifetime of hurt. Yet what filled me wasn't triumph. It was relief tangled with sorrow, both breathing the same air. As we stepped out of the church, sunlight struck my face, bright, almost punishing. I thought about what boundaries really meant, how love can blur them until it's almost too late to draw the line. The echo of those handcuffs lingered long after silence returned. To me, that sound became something sacred, the sound of boundaries being rebuilt. 6 months later, peace had slowly settled back over Aspen Falls. The town glowed under early spring light, and the chaos of that day had softened into memory. Ethan was serving his sentence in state prison. The newspapers had moved on, and life had found its rhythm again. Jade returned to work, taking long walks in the evenings, learning how to live without glancing over her shoulder. Some mornings still brought tears, but they came less and less. One day I received a letter bearing the correctional facility's stamp. It was from Ethan. He wrote about his childhood, how he grew up bouncing through foster homes, never knowing what stability or real love felt like. He said he wasn't seeking forgiveness, only understanding. He admitted that people like him learned to deceive long before they ever learned to trust. I read the letter twice. Anger flared, but behind it was something quieter. Pity, maybe. Monsters, I realized, aren't always born. Sometimes they are shaped by the neglect that surrounds them. I didn't write back, but I couldn't bring myself to throw the letter away either. I folded it neatly and tucked it in a drawer. A week later, Jade told me she had decided to forgive him, not because he deserved it, but because she needed her peace back. Forgiveness, she said, wasn't erasing the past. It was choosing not to carry the weight of another person's mistakes. Ezra said nothing, just squeezed her hand, pride softening his eyes. That weekend, the three of us drove up to the old mountain cabin. The roof was still in need of repair, and the air smelled of pine and weathered wood. Sunlight streamed across the porch as we worked together, hammering and painting, rebuilding in quiet rhythm. For the first time in months, the silence between us felt gentle, no longer heavy with what had been lost. Watching my children mend what time had worn down, I thought about the foundations that must be rebuilt after betrayal. Some cracks never disappear, but they remind us of what held through the damage. Forgiveness, boundaries, self-respect. Those are the tools that rebuild a life after someone tries to break it. That's how you begin again,